Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, and participants of the National Development Policymaking on Decarbonization to Achieve Clean and Affordable Electricity seminar. I would like to kindly invite you to enter the Singaraja 2 hall and be seated. Distinguished delegates and all participants, I would like to remind you to implement the COVID-19 preventive standard health protocols by always wearing your mask within all areas of our event, except while you are eating. And distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please be seated as our seminar is about to commence. This session will be recorded by a professional photographer. If there is anyone requesting a consent, please see one of our organizers. Hello and a very special welcome. Firstly, Honorable Mrs. Raden Siliwanti, Co-Chair of the G20 Development Working Group and Director for Multilateral Funding, the Ministry of National Development Planning, or BAPNAS. Honorable delegates of G20, the Honorable Representatives of Directorate of Electricity, Telecommunication and Informatics at the Ministry of National Development Planning, BAPNAS. Ms. Lisa Tinshert, Energy Program Director of GIZ Indonesia and Project Manager of CASE Indonesia. Distinguished speakers, journalists, and all participants attending this side event, both offline at the venue and online. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good day to you all and welcome to Bali Nusa Dua Convention Center. We are very honored and happy to have all of you here today. For the G20 Development Working Group side event, International Expert Sharing Session on National Development Policymaking on Decarbonization to achieve clean and affordable electricity. This event, organized by the Clean, Affordable and Secure Energy for Southeast Asia, or CASE, is a bilateral partnership project by the Ministry of National Development Planning, or BAPNAS, of Indonesia, and the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action of Germany. In Indonesia, the project is implemented by GIZ Indonesia and Institute for Essential Services Reform. May I please have a big round of applause to this side event. And let me introduce myself, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Edmund Daniel. I'm the senior journalist for Metro TV, and it's an honor to be the MC for today's event. And this event will be conducted fully in English, and there will be a sign language interpretation as well. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, today we aim to establish a cross-country expert exchange session on national development planning for power sector decarbonization with the specific goals of providing a platform for G20 countries to share their national development policy-making experiences in decarbonization, increasing the participants' comprehension of the importance of mainstreaming power sector decarbonization into the national development plans, and also for stimulating multi-stakeholder discussions on decarbonization. And before we begin our session, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite all of you to stand up for the Indonesia's national anthem. And this is the national anthem of Indonesia, Indonesia Raya. and ladies and gentlemen, you may kindly be seated. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to commence this meeting, I would like to invite the co-chair of the G20 Development Working Group and Director for Multilateral Funding, the Ministry of National Development Planning, Bapanas, to present her opening remarks. Please welcome to the podium, Mrs. Raden Siliwanti.
Ibu Lisa Tinsa, Director of the Energy Program GIZ Indonesia and ASEAN. Bapak Rahmat Mardiana, so represented by Bapak Yadi R. Darajat, Directorate from Electricity, Telecommunication and Informatics at the Ministry of National Development Planning. Distinguished G20 delegates and participants, ladies and gentlemen. As some of you have met before, so my name is Raden Siliwanti. I am the co-chair of the 2022 G20 Development Working Groups. It is my absolute honor to open this very important sharing session on the national development policy making on decarbonization to achieve clean and affordable electricity. I would like to begin by giving you a short flashback on a picture captured by NASA that I believe we all have encountered at least once during our time working in development sectors. Now, I don't have the picture with me, but I can describe it to you. It is a picture of the world at night, with some parts of the world sparkling as the stars, while the rest is dark as the cave. So it happens in Jambi, in the some village, part of the Indonesia in Sumatra Island. It's very dark. Given the many times we have seen the picture, you would think that by now a region of the world are already visible at night from outer space, and that everyone now has access to electricity. Even you know that in Jambi, in the village I mentioned, now is not dark anymore. Yet it is not the case actually. Though there has been significant progress, of course. The rate of increase in global electricity access has been considerably slower these past few years. From 2010 until 2018, there was an increase of 1.8% of the global electricity access. However, according to the 2020 Sustainable Development Goals report by the UN, the rise has slowed to a 0.50% annually in 2018 to 2020. As of 2020, there are still 733 million people living without electricity in far-reaching regions. This trend is surely concerning, as electricity services are very crucial to the improvement of humans' quality of life, and therefore the fundamental to development. At the same time, we are faced with the fact that the world's main sources of electricity is still carbon-intensive fuels, and hence decarbonization is the way forward. The threat of the climate change that we are facing right now demands us to not only provide necessary and affordable energy, but also to pursue cleaner energy sources for electricity. This is just to give you the example happen in the field. Ladies and gentlemen, in these years, G20 Development Working Group, we have raised the issue of the green and blue economy through low carbon and climate resilient development as one of our key focus area in our priority to strengthen developing countries' recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and resilience, and of course, from the other challenging issues on the climate change crisis. Although we don't not particularly discuss energy and electricity, we identified that when pursuing a greener economy, which also includes a cleaner energy sector, we should ensure that the transition are just and inclusive. For developing countries, including LDCs and SEED, small island developing states, clean energy that bring accessible and affordable electricity to all people is the ideal, but we are often faced with limitations. To have better navigation, it is only the strategic for us to acknowledge that the road ahead will likely have some potholes or cave. This way, we can find the best possible route for everyone. Hence, challenges must be identified, opportunities must be optimized, and plans must be well designed. Thankfully, we will have more knowledge about the challenges, opportunities, and experience on decarbonization policy making from our distinguished speaker today in a nearly structured two sessions. Right after me, Dr. Tarinya Supasa will present the collective challenges to achieve the development and climate target related to the global energy. Then we will continue with the first session that discuss the development priority agenda to support the Paris Agreement and net zero emission target. We will benefit from the experiences of Indonesia and South Africa on how each respective country incorporate the decarbonization of their power sector in their development planning and visions. This is also relevant with the discussion in the DWG, where we emphasize that just an inclusive transition to green economy and a cleaner energy subsequently must begin with the proper planning and policy making. Mainstreaming low carbon development strategies to the national development planning becomes the starting point for this, and I'm proud to say that this is one of the action proposed in the DWG. We already put it in our document in the DWG. The decarbonization of the power sector and passing down fossil fuel can only be done if we can identify the instrument to do so by taking into account national context. This will be the main idea of the second session, where we will hear from South Africa's experience on their carbon pricing policies and insight from Germany of their action processes to decommission hard coal power plants, which we'll surely learn so much from. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues, it is now time for us to shift from the question of which one should we prioritize, energy accessibility or climate action, and begin to seek the most effective way to minimize the trade-off between the two, energy accessibility or climate action. I believe this valuable opportunity of exchange experiences and sharing good practices will help us explore the path to do so. For that, we would like to extend my highest appreciation and gratitude to the host of this side event, the Clean and Affordable and Secure Energy for Southeast Asia case, a program between the Indonesian Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas, and the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Also to Bapak Iwayan Koster, Governor of Bali, Executive Director of Indonesia Environment Fund, Bapak Joko Hendrato, Director of Energy Program GIZ, Ibu Lisa Transat, Case Program in Indonesia, GIZ. And of course to my dear colleague, Mbak Rahmat Mardiana, who is not, actually he is absent from this today's session, but I believe that he prepared for us for this meeting. So thank you for showing us how collaboration can translate into vision, into action through this side event. Thank you very much once again, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much to Mrs. Raden Siliwanti, who is the co-chair of the G20 Development Working Group and Director for Multilateral Funding from the Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas. And before we begin our session, let us hear some information regarding our theme for today on collective challenges to achieve global energy, development and climate targets, which is presented by Dr. Tarinya Supasa, that already joining us with our online from Bangkok. Let us welcome the project lead, Energy Policy Southeast Asia at Agora Energy Vendor, Dr. Tarinya Supasa.
Excellency, distinguished G20 delegates, Bappenas delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I am Tarinya Supasa, the project lead, Southeast Asia Energy Policy from Agora Energy Vendor. We are the international think tank based in Berlin. I'm also from CASE Project. So today, it is my highly honors to be invited as the speaker for this G20 side event. Would you please share my slide, please? Thank you so much. Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, this time is a crucial moment that life risks links to climate change keep rising. In parallel, it is a moment that we are confronting energy crisis that have brought new urgency and challenge to many nations regarding energy security. So today, I would like to share the perspective on the collective challenge to achieve global energy transition, future development, and climate targets. Next slide, please. So the group of G20, who represent more than 3/4 of the world greenhouse gas emissions, have shown the signal of growing awareness of the risks posed by climate change. 70% of G20 members have either committed to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions or the target are under discussions. This is an impressive signal. However, according to the current studies this year, revealed that none of the G20 members has implemented sufficient and concrete policies to match with what they have promised yet, although some are closer. So these actions reflect the disconnection of political ambitions on net zero targets and the reality. Next slide, please. This study is a good example, examining 6 major areas that policymakers shall address to limit greenhouse gas emissions. Overall, the power sector, which is represented here in blue color, has made most progress. Over the past year, most G20 members have committed to push more efforts to increase renewable energy targets in their power sector. Nonetheless, considering small fractions of the other colors, there is still some room for all nations to tackle more focus on low carbon fuel, industry, circular economies. Regarding to today's discussions and focus, so let's look closer into 4 countries. Starting from Germany, on your left-hand side, Germany is a top performer. The country also takes the top spot for policy in power, low carbon fuels, decarbonized building sector, and industry. Besides power sector, some areas are still required to be focused. The industrial heat decarbonization is in the nascent stage. The pathway to lower emission for each subsector are still undefined. However, the policy movement in Germany, which is the country has the policy to promote green hydrogen and is about to implementing concrete incentive to scaling up hydrogen production. Also, Germany has the largest, second largest, most electrolyzer capacity in the world, just after China. Moving away from Germany to South Korea, besides impressive policy in power sector, South Korea is the best performer in circular economy. The recycling targets landfill tax are mandated. The policy in place are stable and well communicated to public. Regulations are enforced consistently. Nonetheless, the other sector needs to be more pay attention. For example, the lower uptake of electric vehicle comparing to last year, which result in slower public charging network investment growth. Next is about South Africa. The government has made impressive progress in decarbonizing the power sector. South Africa Renewable Energy Auctions Program is revived and back on track. Also include energy storage in their national auction plan. But considering the other sector, there's still room for improvement. Lastly, Indonesia. In general, Indonesia has a better concrete policy and implementing plan comparing to last year. However, rooms for improvement still open for all areas. Next slide, please. To reach net zero, phasing out fossil fuel is crucial and inevitable. Given EU case to accelerate coal phase out, a combination of strategic policy elements are needed for coal exit actions by 2030. So the first element focusing more on replacing coal with renewable energy, remove barrier, allows to ramping up solar and wind capacity expansion, but not only focus on technology. The market instruments also needs to be accelerate the progress. For example, the European Union emission trading system or cap and trade scheme. The second element is about how to ensure the power system security and lowering the risk for blackout system. So the safeguard system has to ensure sufficient capacity, generation, transmission grid capacity to meet the load, even in the unforeseen change. In general, the energy market needs to become more flexible to balance supply and demand under normal and unusual conditions. Lastly, strengthening the interconnected national power system is also crucial. The last component for coal exit is about enable a just coal phase out, ensuring that all available funds and supporting measures are designed to support coal to green transitions. So this is the example of three components, which is showing robust, connected, and consistent. And a good example that's strong required to phase out coal. Next slide, please. In last year, the global electricity demand rebounds and turned out to be much more stronger than from the economic recovery. From the chart on your left-hand side, it's showing that renewable is not expanding quickly enough. Then coal production have to be ramped up to meet the needs. Gas in yellow color is minimized due to gas shortage and steeply rising natural gas price. So this rebound coal demand is actually drive nations to not on track to achieve net zero trajectory, and it is unlikely to align with the climate target. On the other hand, if we are considering on the right-hand side illustrations, which is represent projection, what the message would like, what the key message that we can find here, renewable energy shall be accelerated faster to avoid ramp up coal or gas in future. This is also to avoid the energy security risks, because if the investment in clean energy is still not fast enough, meanwhile the investment in fossil fuel are foreseen shrinking. This could risk to the supply shortage in future. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. And not always discussion go around renewable energy, but also energy efficiency and conservation. It's one of the most impactful and the fastest way to respond to energy crisis. But several evidence reveal that potential of energy saving are not fully realized yet in G20 countries. Refer to the figure, energy efficiency measures include not only technical efficiency, but also including electrification. For example, electrify vehicle, electrifying low and medium temperature for heat process. For example, replacing fossil fuel boiler with more efficient heat pump. Extended also to behavioral change, and the other avoided energy demand, including digitalizations, material efficiency, for example, recycling of plastic and scrap steel, and fuel switching. So energy efficiency can provide high impact to reduce energy consumption for years to come. And these measures should be not overlooked. In addition, in order to incentivize a faster energy efficiency, border measures are needed to be considered. For example, a higher emissions in emission trading scheme. Next slide, please. So what I presented earlier, although the decarbonization investment, it seems urgency, but the green spending seems lag behind. So making green recovery from the pandemic provide a unique opportunity to put the decarbonization at the center of economic recovery package. The series of economic recovery measures could be aligned with climate pathway. It is encouraging renewable energy infrastructure investment, modernized grid network. However, this opportunity is not yet realized by most G20 emerging economies. Meanwhile, only moderate share of recovery spending has been shown in advanced economy. This is mean a comprehensive package combining green investment are still needed to emphasize to reach net zero target. Next slide, please. The last slide from me. The other challenge needs to be considered for moving energy transition in G20. The outstanding barriers to block scaling up RE is the long-term fossil fuel procurement contract, especially for coal and gas. Renegotiating and new flexible contracts are urgent and necessary. The second one is the advanced energy efficiency program in G20. Maybe starting from understanding the gap between members, it could be useful. Comparing to others, where each nation currently are. Identify the gap, bring the idea to speed up the effort. The benchmarking can be done within G20 and actually can be done beyond. As well as the legal frameworks are required to drive progress. For example, building codes and minimum energy performance standards to intervene the technology choice decisions. In emerging economy, future trend is moving from centralized fashions to more distributed generation source. Also, the new demand providing new load pattern from the growth of electric vehicle, industrial demand response, sector coupling, and prosumer. The new regulations and modern grids are priority to take into account. Lastly, the appropriate carbon pricing policy, such as enough high carbon tax and emission trading, needs to move away from fossil fuel investment. This is to ensure that future investments support just transition and bring benefits to green recovery transition. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. So looking forward to the discussion session next. Thank you.
That was Project Leader of Energy Policy Southeast Asia at Agora Energi Vendor. Thank you to Dr. Tarinya Supasa. Honorables, ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with the next program, I would like to take this opportunity to call for a group photo session on stage. And I'd like to invite to the stage, again, Mrs. Raden Siliwanti, Mr. Yadi J. Ardajat, Mr. Sung Chan Chang, and Ms. Lisa Tinshirt. Please come up to the stage and participate on the photo session. As well, joining us on stage, saya mempersilakan Bapak Yusuf Suryanto beserta jajaran dari Direktorat Jenderal KTI Kementerian Bappenas. Silakan naik ke atas panggung dan partisipasi dalam sesi foto berikut ini. And also to team from CASE Indonesia. And joining us virtually, I'd like to call upon our speakers to join us for the virtual photo session. Ms. Charlene Hemraj, Dr. Tarinya Supasa, and Ms. Anne Baguette. And I'd like to call upon Mr. Jadi J. Ardajat, Mr. Sung Chan Chang, and Ms. Lisa Tinshirt to remain on stage because there will be a panel session after this photo. So to the three lovely people, please remain on stage. Mr. Yadi J. Ardajat, Mr. Sung Chan Chang, and Ms. Lisa Tinshirt. And thank you to all our dignitaries and speakers for the photo session. And before we recommence, I'd like to kindly inform that in between the session, around 3:40, there will be no coffee break, unfortunately. However, for those of you who'd like to take some coffee, you may feel free to take it in the foyer and bring it back inside, participate on the next session. Okay, honorables, ladies and gentlemen, our panel session will be led by our distinguished moderator. She is Ms. Lisa Tinshirt, the Energy Program Director of GIZ Indonesia, as well as Project Manager of CASE Indonesia. And this panel discussion on national development policy making on decarbonization to achieve clean and affordable electricity. Please give a big round of applause to Ms. Lisa Tinshirt.
No, it's working, okay. Okay, there's tape to not push the button, but you have to push the button, so that's the mystery. Welcome everyone, also from my side. Very happy to seeing everyone to this session today. Very glad that we can have this session from the CASE project within the context of the G20. Very appreciative towards the host, Ibu Silivanti. Also, thank you so much for your opening remarks. I think what I took from your opening remarks is your reminder that if you talk about green recovery, green energy transition, then we're talking about a just and inclusive transition. I think that's a very important word also for today's discussion. And Tirania from Agora, I think, also reminded us on the urgency of the discussion. Not enough has been done yet, and there's quite a few challenges still ahead of us. There was the reminder that when we talk about decarbonization today, that we have to look at all the pillars of sustainability, so from energy security to the just topic and, of course, greenhouse gas emission reductions. With that, I would like to move to the content of our discussion today. We've got a lot of good scene setting. We've prepared today two segments, basically, where we try in our discussion segment to cross from the one side on the strategies, the plannings, the targets that governments are doing in the context of achieving net zero emissions, right? This is the task that we all in it together. And we look at the decarbonization of the energy sector, and that of course means we're looking at fossil fuel phase out, focus on coal phase out, and of course of upscaling of renewable energy. We will do this on an overarching level, and then we dive a bit deeper and look into concrete examples, how this has been done already in other countries. So we get to look into instruments, and then at the end we try to wrap it up a little bit again in the context of the G20 and what's the role of international cooperation in achieving this just energy transition. To do this, we've prepared for country interventions. So we're very happy to have 4 distinguished speakers who take us on this journey to talk about the planning over to coal phase-out topics and instruments, focus on auctioning schemes, as well as the carbon tax. And afterwards, after these 4 presentations, it will be roughly 15 minutes, we will go into a discussion segment. So we will have prepared some questions for our speakers, but I would also invite you to listen carefully, to note down any questions you might be having to the speakers. And then we will also invite for the room, for the audience to come in. Okay, with that, without further ado, I would like to introduce my first 2 speakers, the gentleman on stage with us already. We have Payadi Adajat. He is the chief planner for national development planning at Bappenas. So we're very happy to have you here and also to represent KTI, Par Rahmat, the director, who cannot be here with us today. Payadi will talk about Indonesia's current work on national development planning and bringing in the energy transition theme in there, so linking energy and development planning and the challenges within it. And the second speaker also on stage with me already, Seungchang Chang from South Korea. You are the team leader of a new and renewable energy industry division at the Korean Energy Agency. And Seungchang will talk about also South Korea's way to decarbonize the energy sector, and will dive a bit deeper into the renewable energy industry, how to boost the industry and build it up. Okay, without further ado, Payadi, I would hand over to you for your input presentation. I think this should work. Or you can also do it there as you like. It's up to you.
I can see the screen.
You can also see it here, but here.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to be here. There is so many experts here regarding the decarbonization domestically, internationally. So we are sharing together here regarding decarbonization also in our country. We would like to, are going to share with you regarding the Indonesian power system decarbonization. First slide, please. Next slide, please. There are three items we would like to share with you. We'd like to describe first regarding the national commitment on decarbonization in here, Indonesia, and then the second one regarding the low carbon development on the medium-term development plan 2020 and 2024 and toward 2013 regarding the electricity provision and realization. And then the third one regarding the exercising some scenario for the electricity decarbonization toward 2016. First, next slide, please. As you know, please, next slide. As you know that our country have a great long-term and economic development vision, 2045, that already stated by our president, our ministry, that we have a vision 2045 for the economic development. What is vision? The vision is, our target is, hopefully in 2045, we will come out with the middle income trap, and then our country will be a country with the high income country, and then also the high economic growth would like to reach, hopefully can be parallelly will be reached by the role of eastern part of Indonesia in national economic is 25%. So to reach this Okay, so to reach this target, the average growth of economic should be reached average per year at least 6% every year for the next 25 years until 2045. It means that for this target, to reach this target, there are several strategies. One of the important strategy is the green economy, low carbon development, and the energy transition. This is already several times mentioned by our minister. This is very important strategy to reach the economic transformation to reach the vision 2045. This is the basic, the economic vision is basic, will be influenced the economic transition, energy transition in our country. How about in energy sector? That I mentioned before, the transition of our energy. As you know that in our country, we already have a law number 13, 2016, regarding the ratification of Paris Agreement. We would like to reduce our carbon emission by 25 to 29% in 2013, also 41% with the international assistance in 2013. There are several activities, several strategies, several programs to reach this reduction. This is the development of the renewable energy, implementation of energy efficiency and energy conservation, also the application of clean energy technology. Besides that, also our president already mentioned several big activity to reach the clean energy in the future, our future in in 2015. Last year in 2021 in Glasgow, our president mentioned there are several huge activity. There are huge program would like to do by our country regarding the low carbon development. First, regarding the moratorium of forest and peatland conservation to reduce forest fire by 82%. Also regarding the development of green industrial park in North Kalimantan, more than 12,000 hectares in North Kalimantan. Also unlock the investment in energy transition through development biofuel, lithium battery industry, and electric vehicle. So not satisfied only just to get there, so our president, our government, this country also nowadays preparing something bigger than that to exercising on updating the international decarbonization roadmap, net zero emission 2016. This is also would like under formulation by our country. There are some scenario being done by our country, by our government. Next slide, please. Sorry. This kind of many scenario this scenario there is some scenario have been report our minister to UNFCCC, United Nations, but at the end we already conclude that we would like to focus in 2016 in net zero emission in our country. There are several scenarios have been done, have been exercising by our country. So hopefully this can be finished as soon as possible, because not too long from here we would like to formulate this exercising to be put on our national development plan. Also our minister mentioned that also all the scenario option certainly has a different consequence, both in terms of economic, social, economic, environmental aspect, also cost and investment requirement. Now we would like to little bit brief describing regarding the low carbon development on our medium-term development plan 2020 and 2024. And toward 2013 regarding the electricity. In this slide, if we see the number is very complicated number here, but the point is, as you know that our target is to reduce our low carbon reduction 29% in 2013. So the contribution of energy sector is the contribution of energy sector is 11%. And the question is, what the contribution of energy sector, electricity sector? The electricity sector, if we calculate the electricity sector contribution, should be 5.3% in 2013. From the 11%, the contribution of the electricity sector is 5.3%. The number put on that in the right. So the non-power plant is 5.7%. The totally 11%. So the power plant, the electricity sector contribution should be 5.3%. It means that in electricity sector, we have to reach the portion of renewable energy in our electricity sector could be more than 51% in 2013. So what happened in our medium term in RPJM 2000 until 2024? So that until 2024, we should reach the portion of our renewable energy should be 20%. I repeat again. Until 2024, we should the renewable energy until 20%. The portion of renewable energy should be 20%. With the additional capacity of renewable energy, almost 9 gigawatt. And then until 2030, we should portion of renewable energy more than 51%. If we reach the target 20% in 2024, it means 70% of our target 2030, we already reached 70%. It means then 4% to 5.3%. 75%. This is the condition, the plan of 2024 and 2013. And then what happened the realization? This is already mentioned by the Ministry of Energy Mineral Resources. Until now, until 2021, we already reached portion of the energy, renewable energy, already 15%, include the utilization of biofuel, biodiesel. So, it means that the configuration should be catch up to reach the additional capacity of renewable energy for the other beside the biofuel, geothermal, hydro, and solar. In next year until 3 years or until 2030. The 15% is because our capacity of power plant nationally is more than 73 gigawatt. And the renewable energy capacity this year is more than 11 gigawatt. It means 15%. Next slide. This is the distribution of our primary energy that I mentioned. We already reached until 15% until this year. How about in 2013? Like I mentioned before, we should reach until 50.1%. The installed capacity of the generator in 2020 is 60 gigawatt. The plan is to add a new power plant is more than 40 gigawatt. It means that the portion of renewable energy will be reaching 20.9 gigawatt or 51.6% to reach the target 11% contribution of energy sector compared to our target 2030 totally 29% based on the ROPTL. Yeah. And then the last one is would like to explore a little bit regarding the decarbonization toward 2016. Based on some scenario, actually we already exercise some scenario. The first scenario we already discussed together with some line ministry, especially the technical ministry, such as Minister of Transportation, Minister of Industry, and then the exercise result. The exercise result until by 2060, the emission will be reached 401 million tons for the energy sector. But after we discuss with Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Environmental and Forestry as a coordinator for the environmental program, they would like to more to tight, to be more tight, to be tightening the condition. Hopefully that energy sector contribution to be reduced, that the carbon emission should be reached 87 million ton in 2016. And then we already conclude with the two scenario. Few months ago, we conclude the carbon emission 2016 should be reached 129 million ton. This is the scenario already conclude together, and then there are some scenario. There is some impact also. The electricity demand will be reached 1,900 terawatt hour until 2030, 300 gigawatt tera hour until 2016. This is the scenario. I would like to emphasize in this slide, if we go to the net zero emission in electricity sector, it means that we'll come up with the nuclear power plant in 2016. But I think if we would like to avoid the nuclear power system, we have to improve with the solar bigger than this scenario. It means the consequence of cost of production will be different. So the consequence of the zero emission for the electricity will be increase the cost of production the electricity. Maybe approximately in 2060 will be near 9 cents US dollar per kilowatt hour. This is some scenario already being made by us, the government. So the question in the future is how to optimize this scenario. We would like to make the optimal solution, to make the optimal scenario, which one is the better one for our country. And then the last one would like to emphasize regarding the supporting policy process, regarding the long-term energy scenario. First, of course, we would like to consider regarding the national energy policy, national energy plan, also regarding the general electricity planning, RUKN, also 10-year electricity supply chain belonging to PT PLN, and then will be as a consideration to make a long development planning, next long development planning, because nowadays, currently Indonesia development is in a 4th 5-year phase. The last 5-year phase in the long-term development plan 2005-2025, it is the time to start formulating next long-term development plan and the medium long-term development plan. It means that all the scenario have to be finished at least 2030. And then we can formulate this optimal solution, this optimal scenario to be put on updating NDC and put on national development plan, long national development plan and mid-term development plan. There are some scenario to be together to be more integrated in our plan. This is what would like to say, and then let's discuss together later on. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Payadi, for enlightening us on Indonesia's case. Then I would already hand over directly to Sung Chang to talk about South Korea, please.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Risa. Yes, and good afternoon, distinguished participants. Let me see. Can I? Could you please?
Can we have the slides?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, distinguished participants. My name is Seung Chan Chang, team leader of Renewable Energy Industry Division in Korea Energy Agency. My topic is focused on how to cooperate with the renewable energy manufacturing industry toward end this vision, national determined contribution on greenhouse gases. Last May in South Korea, new government started to work on clean energy transition with more practical perspectives. Today, I'd like to talk about new energy policy direction of Korea relevant to new and renewable energy development issue. My presentation starts with Korean renewable energy policy and new directions for clean energy transition. Then explain on the discussion issues of power system decarbonization, low carbon renewable manufacturing, innovative renewable energy technology development based on Korean government policy initiative and KEA's working experiences. South Korea registered ambitious target of reducing 40% from 2018 GHG emission by 2030. It is very, very tough target from the view of domestic expert groups, and discussions are not ceasing. Basically, emission trading scheme has an umbrella role of reducing greenhouse gases. All the emission sectors need to be active changes from existing energy delivery and using patterns. With this in mind, Korean government promotes clean energy transition continually by checking on many options of energy efficiency, renewable, nuclear, hydrogen, and so on. As you might know, Korea has the lowest share of renewable energy among OECD countries. Main reason is mountainous topology and high population density and absence of transborder interconnections. Last year, renewable energy use consists of 4% of total final energy consumption, and renewable generation capacity reached 30 gigawatts at the end of last year. PV capacity has steeply increased and reached 22 gigawatts, threefold and more increase during the past 5 years. But wind generators have installed 1.7 gigawatt cumulatively. Electricity generation from new and renewable energy facilities shares 7.5% of total electricity generation due to the wide deployment of PV and fuel cell. As of May, 2 months ago, monthly power production share of PV in total generation recorded 7.2%. At the time, coal 30%, LNG 26%, nuclear 32%, hydro 0.5%, biomass 2.1%, and wind 0.5%. Core renewable policy consists of technology development, support from the government, RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard Obligation for Power Generation Company, and mandatory renewable construction of public buildings. MOTI, Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, governs renewable energy development initiative by enhancing the program of subsidy, loan, and research and development. And KEA has implemented and participated in most of those programs. Renewable Portfolio Standard obliges power supplies with an installed capacity bigger than 500 megawatts to increase their share of renewable generation directed by the Act. And the implementing cost is just adjusted with average investment afterwards. Failure of obligation is subject to a penalty of 150% of average market value of each compliance certificate not obtained for the year. And third one is public building, which one is larger than new and extended space of 1,000 meters square, are obliged to increase the share of renewables in their final energy consumption. Renewable share is guided to increase in the planning permission. 2020 sales of renewable new and renewable energy industry is estimated to 25 trillion Korean won, and the sum of annual NRE investment amount to 7.7 trillion Korean won. that amount you can divide the 1,200 into United States dollars, or invested from the 82,000 business entities. KS, renamed Korean Standard Certified Manufacturers of NRE products, were 250 in 2020, and their sales reached to 2.6 trillion Korean won, including overseas import. Most of the sales are PV systems, module, junction box, and inverter, followed by fuel cell and geothermal heat pump. Ensuring the performance and quality of renewable energy products, KS certification scheme has applied based on the Industry Standardization Act since 2015. 19 categories have been applied for KS certifications, including crystalline silicon PV module, solar thermal heat collector, wind turbine, geothermal heat pump, and fuel cell. KEA, as a representative certification body of new and renewable industry, has developed a performance testing infrastructure in collaboration with qualified 19 testing laboratories. And Ministry of Energy announced energy policy directions of new government last month. Main issue is that nuclear comes back, and the role of energy efficiency and renewables emphasized more. Korean government wants to proceed clean energy transition in more practical and realistic ways, with the direction of cutting down fossil energy share progressively in harmony with nuclear, renewable, and hydrogen. Previous long-term target of renewable 30-20, which is 20% of renewable electricity is supplied by 2030, will be reinforced. Considering the nuclear power contribution to the long-term energy mix and the current development trend of renewables, outlook of renewable generation is to reach 25% by 2030, and cumulative NRE deployment of 70 gigawatts. MOTI proceeds to contemplate on grid connections, and required investment and energy transition target will be revised by resetting overall national energy development plans. For ensuring power system decarbonization, grid modernization could be a leading role to accommodate power flow changes from variable renewable energies. Korea needs to build up scheduled transmission and distribution networks construction, and to stabilize the renewable power access and connections. It is expected to regionally distribute energy resources can be stimulated by introducing VPP, virtual power plant businesses, in the electricity market. Expanding clean energy technology requires lots of critical minerals in sequences. Recycling equipment and components could be a new industry. Recent Korea constructed PV recycling center to recollect raw materials from waste PV. And many demonstration projects also need to be tried in the power market with the advancement of technologies such as vehicle-to-grid interconnection, and then energy superstations, and so on. For boosting domestic renewable energy industries and creating green jobs, obviously, more renewable power plants need to be planned. Project development has a leading role to explore a new installation site and need to be encouraged periodically, such as 3-year span, it's a regular span needed. Korea promoted resident participation project to create national new and renewable industry in collaboration with residents and regional authority. Main purpose is to request residents concession and preemptive conflict prevention on the introduction of new and renewable energy facilities through the informative dialogues and communications. Business models, including power transaction and revenue sharing, need to be revised in more favorable conditions to facilitate active participation of the residents. RE100 is now spotlighting among global leading companies who want to contribute net zero emission by 2050. It's a long-term perspective. And Korea plans to expand the program to domestic companies, including small and medium enterprises. More elaboration on incentive scheme is required currently. For facilitating innovative energy technology development, PV and wind have a leading role in enhancing industrial value chains. From R&D to market creation, cutting-edge technologies such as PV tandem cell and BIPV, building integrated photovoltaics, and the superside wind turbine will gain popularity in terms of performance, safety, and environmental soundness. In the manufacturing processes, carbon assessment of new and renewable energy products has growing concern to minimize life cycle carbon emissions. And life cycle development of green hydrogen is supported by the recent registration of Hydrogen Economy and Safety Management Act. It is highly expected to create hydrogen circulated industry in near future with the appearance of efficient electrolysis and high power fuel cell, hydrogen vehicle, hydrogen combustor, and so on. As the Korean Energy Agency continually drives clean energy transition from South Korea in cooperation with domestic and global partners, including Indonesian companies. My last slide is some clips of communication increasing awareness of net zero society to the Korean people, especially inviting Minister Ri Chang-yang of Ministry of Trade and Industry Energy. Energy efficiency activities and renewable energy use are highly praised because we have cost barriers to overcome. This slide may help to understand the Korean perspective or attitude of the cutting down the greenhouse gas emission and Korean energy transition. Thank you for the kind listening.
Thank you so much, Sang-Chang, for this interesting presentation on South Korea. Quite different challenges, and interesting to see what you're aiming to do with the renewable energy industry, so overcoming being the lowest, the G20 country with the lowest share of renewables. With that, I would directly move over to our two additional speakers we're having. We're online, and I hope she is also online, our first speaker from South Africa, Charlene Hemrat. I assume she has joined us by now. She's the director of the Environmental and Fuel Taxes Division at the National Treasury of South Africa. And Charlene has most recently worked on introducing the carbon tax in South Africa. So she will, in this second segment we're looking at now, she will introduce a bit more on the experience of South Africa in introducing the carbon tax and how this has, what's the impact and the relevance for the energy sector and decarbonizing South Africa's energy sector towards a coal phase out. She will also look into the aspect of just transition. So, Charlene, I hope you're with us. We can hear you, but with an echo. We cannot see you yet. Do we have a connection, or should I move over first to the next speaker? from Germany. Ah, there you are, Charlene. Okay, great. We can see you now. Right now you seem muted. Maybe it's a problem in the room. Yes, keep talking until we hear you. So far we can't hear you yet. Oh la la, we get an echo from you. So right now we have visual connection, but not the tone yet. Maybe keep on talking if it starts working. Okay, I think the technicians are trying to fix it. But should we continue with the German side test if Charlene, the question just came if you have twice turn the device on. Are you connected twice? Is that the question? Maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's the problem. And then maybe mute one of the devices.
You hear me?
Now we can hear you, yes, and you can hear me as well, I hope.
Yes, I can hear you as well. Is it possible to share?
The connection is not so good yet. We have quite a bit of an echo. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
Okay, maybe you can say a bit more to see if the connection is stable enough.
Okay, so I am connected. And I can screen.
Shall we start with that? Okay, Charlene, from you. And now also from me, I think we have a connection problem with you. We suspect it's because of you connected with two devices, so maybe try to disconnect one of them. The team will be online and try to get you in, but I would suggest that for the stage and the audience, we move to the German speaker first from Germany and bring you in then as the fourth speaker. So with that, I really hope that we have a connection to Anne Baguette. From Germany, so she is an economic advisor and has been most recently or is involved in the implementation of the tendering procedures of the coal phase out in Germany. So the context in Germany is that Germany has announced a coal phase out target until 2038, and the new government wants to push this target further. Germany is also one of the largest or the largest lignite coal producer, so brown coal, and faces challenge to phase out both hard coal and lignite, and has already embarked on the process and is already implementing the coal phase outs. And we will hear from Anne. She works for the Federal Network Agency, so this is the German gas and power regulator on one specific instrument that was implemented. So to do the coal phase out, and this is the auctions mechanisms for hard coal. And Anne will introduce how this has been done in Germany, and I think this is interesting for many countries of the G20, in particular the 4 countries we've chosen today, as this relates to how to phase out the existing fleet of coal power. That's one of the hot discussions under the net zero emission pathways. So Anne, are you with us? So I think that's also the new age of hybrid events we all need to get used to. The mixture between having audience and speakers on the floor and connected, but I hope we get our 2 speakers online soon. Oh, we can see you.
Can you also hear me?
We hear with an echo.
Okay.
Can you say a bit more?
I tried to put on my headphones, but I think I'm also hearing an echo, so it might be a bit hard to hold the presentation.
Yep.
It would be great if you could sort this out.
Okay, maybe
But
we
I would
try.
like to put on my headphones. Sometimes that helps a bit with the audio quality.
Yeah, I think if you speak slowly, I think it will be okay. Is it good enough, the connection?
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, Lisa.
Now we can't hear you anymore. Very weak. I think it was better before. If you talk slowly, it might be okay for the connection. So we see your presentation and we hope we still have you on the line. Maybe we can try to do the presentation. Test. Okay, now at least you can hear me anymore. Okay, I think we will just continue with the discussion first with the 2 gentlemen until we have hopefully a working line with our 2 ladies online, hopefully soon. So, yeah, Payadi, maybe I start with you. Your presentation, I think, included a lot of, I mean, you showed, I think, the complexity of development planning that Bapena is facing, and also now the upcoming process of developing the next development plans for up to 2045, I think. And you showed a lot of different targets from the power system planning, you mentioned the energy strategies, so various targets and objectives. So I'm wondering from your side, how does the government, how does Bapenas manage these various priorities that the government of Indonesia is having? So on the one side, in terms of economic development, so achieving, you mentioned that Indonesia would become, I think, the top 4 or top 5th economy and the G20 in the future, but then on the other side, these ambitions in terms of reducing emissions and in the energy sector and the coal phase out. So how does Bapenas deal, or the government deal with these conflicting, or are they conflicting priorities? Are there trade-offs?
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Lisa. I would like to inform you that nowadays our country facing the most critical period in this year until next 5 years or 10 5 years. Why? Because as you know that since several years ago, since 2019 and 2020, we execute 35 megawatt coal power plant. It means that after this execution of 35 gigawatt, we are facing the anomaly condition. Our economic growth is not satisfied the growth is not as our expected. And then after that, we are facing the condition of anomaly regarding the COVID. So the condition has suppressed our economic and suppressed our demand. And then nowadays, we are facing again the condition of Ukraine problem to influence other countries, such as our country also, make it the demand will be lower and lower again. So this is make our system will be the potentially will be overcapacity. This is the problem. So they are facing. But the other hand, we are very eager to promote our renewable energy beside the coal power plant. But nowadays, the coal power, the overcapacity will be trade off with the promoting the renewable energy, because the renewable energy is the last to procure. Then the coal power plant. Nowadays, this situation until the next 5 years, we are facing the most difficulties period to forcing the renewable energy, because the condition of coal power plant already facing the overcapacity until now. So this is the question. Maybe there is so many experts here to discuss what is the solution, how to, let's say, as far as possible, still promote the renewable energy with the calculation, the more optimal calculation, without sacrifice the system itself, sacrifice our fiscal situation, especially in PTPLN, our operator, also our government. So that's why this is the point have to be discussed to be make the good solution for us, at least for the next 5 years and then 10 years. And the long term, of course, there are some scenario that we already preparing, have been preparing today. We focusing to 2016. Several strategy would like to be done by us, especially the phasing out the coal power plant. So the next 5 years, I think 2030, this is first time we would like to, let's say, terminate our coal power plant at the first time. More than 1 gigawatt would be passed out. And then next fight again after that, 2035, we would like to phase out again, push out again, and at least at the end of 2042. This is the last we would like to phase out all the supercritical coal power plant in our country, and then will be reduced again until the emission of the power plant itself will be zero in 2016. There are so many programs would like to let's say, in our future, in our scenario, such as phase out the coal power plant, how to promote the solar power plant using the energy storage, also promoting all our potential hydro power plant. But we understand that we are facing many obstacles, many barriers, many constraints to be mitigated by all the stakeholders in our country. But I believe if we would like to implement this plan, we together have to hopefully can be consistent, will be seriously to do that with any consequence. Like I mentioned before, if we have, regarding the capacity of economy, we have a target in vision to 2045. Compared today, we gross national income our country in more, little bit more than 4,000 US dollar per capita. But the target in 2045 hopefully can be reached until more than 12,000 US dollar per capita. It means that will be 3 times or 3-4 our capacity of economy to pay something. It means the purchasing parity of our society will be increase. I think that is not worry about the pricing of the electricity, because in our projection in 2016, using the best all the scenario, even though the high demand with the zero scenario in electricity, the increase of the price of electricity maybe only not too far from our price right now. So the capacity purchasing parity of our country will be increased if we can reach the target of the economic trajectory will be reached, and then the pricing of the electricity, if we transform our system of power plant, transform to renewable energy until 0%, will be covered by our capacity to pay by our society, if we, the target of the economic vision reached by our country. This is the target. So, but the point is we have to be consistent, we have to be serious to implement this situation together with any consequences. This is the point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, also to describing a bit more the particular challenges, and I think these are significant challenges that Indonesia is facing. But I think it's also it's very impressive, I think, how Indonesia deals with it. I mean, we've seen already that universal access to electricity has almost been achieved, and now it's really a question how to move the coal phase out that you talked about, and at the same time achieving the renewable energy targets. And of course, Indonesia is committed to the Paris Agreement. So the challenges are very big, but I think it's very impressive to see how all the different ministries and work on the strategies jointly. So thank you for diving a bit deeper onto this, the complex setup. Maybe Sung Chang, looking at you and your presentation, I think you talked about the ambition of South Korea to increase the renewable energy industry. You talked about domestic industry and manufacturing, domestic manufacturing to boosting this and really creating an industry. So I would like to hear from you a bit more the standardization process, the certificates that were introduced. How did they help to boost innovation also in South Korea? And is there any lessons learned for other countries in G20 countries who want to, develop their renewable energy industry, their domestic renewable energy industry? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. And then, as far as know, is increasing the certification scheme and some activities related to implement it is focused on the securing the quality. I'm sorry? Yeah, quality improvement. And so in this regard, Korea also has the equipped to the standardization and then certification schemes, and then usually certification given requirements and then usually checked by the third party need to ensure performance and qualification on the activity. And then demand of renewable energy certification is increasing from the field of production to the energy service and then linked to the life cycle management. And then, so it is, I think that most of the enterprise, most of the companies are followed by the guidelines of the International Energy international codes and standards, and so I think Indonesian companies also follow by the guidelines and in the private manner and then private sector. But we can consider about the focus on the renewable productions, and then we should check on some more requirements from the field, such as then whether it operated in the isolated manner or connect to the electric grid. They require some kind of additional requirements and then to quantify some level of voltage stabilization and then some connections and on the power flows, and then some kind of the provinces or regional residents requires kind of safety codes and then even some fire alarming process. We can use the high technology in the field, and then we should keep on the monitoring those processes. It is usually carried by the third party or user perspective. So, I'm sorry, user perspective. So, I think Indonesia and other developing countries consider about those certification scheme in the appropriate manner, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Song Chang.
Bu Lisa, may I add something regarding your question,
Please.
Pak? First, regarding, I would like to remind everybody regarding the how to promote the low carbon development. One thing they have to remember is, beside promoting the clean development, clean low carbon development with the renewable energy efficiency and others, one thing have to don't forget regarding the promoting the ecosystem is the productivity of the electricity or energy utilization is very important, because we are facing the inequality in many places. Economic, such as nowadays in our country, in mid-term and mid area of Indonesia, in eastern part Indonesia, have to promote also in utilization of the energy to be more productive in business productive active economic activity in several areas to promote the equality between each other using the energy itself. This is very important. And the second, regarding the in our country, regarding how to promote it in our medium-term and development plan. This is the most difficulty sometimes, like previously, the complexity of our institution have to be sit together and make the solid formulation for that, such as that nowadays we're formulating the scenario for the next long-term, medium-term, low carbon development, and then we're facing the long-term development plan, we're facing the medium-term development plan for the next, and then we have to also, after we formulating the optimal solution, optimal pattern of the 2016, we have to put together in the updating of the national determined contribution, NDC, and then it have to be finished in at least in 2033, because in 2024, we have to finish long-term, medium development plan, and then medium-term development. It means that our NDC have to be updated before 2031. And then together, we have to sit with the good scenario commitment together without different any. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for these inputs. I'm looking at our tech colleagues. I get a hands up. So we're optimistic that this is going to work. Let's start again with Charlene. I hope you can hear me. And I hope we can hear you soon and see you. If you could try again. To put you on the screen. So far we cannot see you yet here in the room. Still not. Oh, okay, we can see you.
Hear me?
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
I hope that's coming next.
Okay. I am unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Maybe continue talking to us.
Can you hear me now? I am unmuted and oops.
Not sure what is the problem here in the room, or
should I try again? So good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Or maybe Anne? Maybe that's working, Anne Baguette. I hope you're still with us.
Hi. Yeah, I'm back. Hi, can you hear me?
We can put you on the screen.
Can you hear me, Lisa?
Oh, okay. We can see you. Let's see if we can also hear you.
Yeah, I think the WebEx people can hear me.
Muted. We
No,
can
I'm
see
not.
you talking but not hearing anything. You're not muted, you're saying. I can lip read that. Okay, so it's an audio problem on our side. Maybe we can find a workaround. Can someone WhatsApp call Anne and we hold it next to the microphone? Would that be a solution? Yeah, I apologize for these technical glimpses.
Check. Check, check.
Okay. Can you say something, Anne?
Yes, of course.
Ah, we can hear you. Oh my God.
Finally.
So good to hear your voice. Still a bit faint. I hope we can get you a bit louder. But yes, we would love to hear you talk about the auctioning scheme.
Yes, I would love to finally share with you. Thank you, Lisa. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. I had to change the background here because my computer was a bit overworked, I think. Okay, so I have been invited today to talk a bit about how we in Germany are trying to phase out coal in electricity generation. And so I would first talk a bit about the institutional framework, and then I will go into more detail on the mechanisms that we use, especially the auction mechanism for hard coal. So next slide, please. So this is just to give you an idea of the scope of the problem. This is just the German electricity mix, so to speak, generation mix. So as you can see, in 2014, coal, which is in this slide, the brown is the lignite, and the black is hard coal. So together they accounted for about 44% of electricity generation in 2014. And then as you can see, over the years, this already decreased significantly to about 23% in 2020. But of course, 23% coal is still quite a lot, and of course was still responsible for a lot of CO2 emissions. So the government decided to set up a so-called coal commission that was tasked with drawing up a plan on how to phase out coal. And if we go to the next slide, we can see what this commission decided on. So in the table, you can see the targets that the Coal Commission proposed and that have now been laid down or set down in law. So now we are talking about gigawatts of capacity, whereas the last slide it was generation, and this is installed capacity now. So today, starting off with around 40 gigawatts of coal capacity, the idea is to decrease it step by step and to phase it out completely by 2038. So these targets and the mechanisms to achieve them are laid down in a law, a nice, lovely German word here, the Kohleverstromungsbeendigungsgesetz. And there's also a contract between the Federal Republic and the companies that operate the lignite power plants and the lignite mines. So in the meantime, we have had a change of government, and now the new coalition aims to accelerate this phase out, ideally to 2030. So next slide, please. Okay, I think, yeah, we can more or less skip over this slide. This just breaks it down to the individual years. But I think with a view to the time, we can go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the mechanisms with which we aim to achieve these targets? Okay, so here we have the overarching targets, and then this is split into two different mechanisms. On the one hand, for hard coal. Thank you. So hard coal and small lignite power plants. Here we have quite a bit of competition in the market. So we have over 50 operators. So which is why we implemented an auction or tendering mechanism. But this is, I would say, a kind of a carrot and stick approach. So the auction is the carrot where you can win compensation. But also if the auctions are undersubscribed, or also later on, there will be the stick, which is a reduction basically by administrative order. So BNetzA would order the power plants to shut down without compensation. And here so far we have paid we have committed to pay around 700 million euros for 10 gigawatts of decommissioned capacity. Then moving on to the other side, if we look at lignite, here the situation is very different because we just have more or less two large operators who also operate the lignite mines. And therefore, it made no sense to implement an auction, but instead the government negotiated a contract with these operators and negotiated a compensation. And the decommissioning dates for the individual power plants are just set out in the law. And the compensation is going to be, this is the plan, that it's going to be 4.35 billion euros for 15 gigawatts of capacity, which of course is quite a lot more if you compare it to hard coal. But you have to keep in mind that this is compensation also for shutting down the lignite mines, not just the power plants. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Now we will leave aside lignite and focus on hard coal. So, and I already said that we have here what I would call a carrot and stick approach. So if you look at the timeline, this is the target years. And in the first 4 target years, we just have a tendering mechanism. But even here, from the beginning, the compensation that could be won in the tender decreased with each year. So already here we had an incentive to participate in the auctions early on. Then moving on to the time between 2024 and 27 or 26, which is where we are now with the auctions. The system works such that if the tender is undersubscribed, so we hold an auction, but if the auction is undersubscribed, then we will sort of fill up the remaining tender volume with administrative orders. So there is a very strong incentive to participate in the auctions because otherwise you will be shut down without compensation. And then in the last sort of third of the process, there will be no more tenders, but instead we will just issue administrative orders to the power plants. And this is basically based on the age of the power plants. So, of course, the oldest power plants and the dirtiest power plants will be shut down first, and there will be no more compensation. Okay, so, lastly, I will go into more detail on how the auction mechanism works. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is really just the mechanism design of this tender. So the volume is calculated as the capacity to be decommissioned by the target year. And then the bids are stated in euros per megawatt of capacity. And there is also a maximum price for each round, which decreases over time, as I said. So now when we come to the ranking mechanism, it gets a bit more complicated because we do not just take into account the cheapest bids, but instead we also take into account the emissions of each power plant. So we look at the historical CO2 emissions and we divide the bid by these emissions. So what this means basically is we look at which bidder asks for the lowest compensation per ton of avoided CO2 emissions. And then we award the bid's compensation until the tender volume is reached, and each bidder, each successful bid receives as compensation the price that they bid. So I'll have an example here on the next slide to make this a bit more clear. So if we can see here, bid number 1 would be maybe a hard coal plant. So they have emissions of, in this case, 6,000 tons of CO2 per year. And they would, in this example, bid 75,000 euros per megawatt. And the second bid, this could be a small lignite plant. So the emissions are much higher with lignite. And they have bid slightly higher. So now then we would go and calculate this ranking index. So if you could continue. Okay, so for the first bid, this index, if we divide the bid by the emissions, it would come out to 12.5 euros per ton of CO2. And for the second bid, this would come out to 7 euros per ton of CO2. So even though the second bid is more expensive, this ranking index is lower, which is why the second bid would be awarded the first rank, and the first bid would be awarded the second rank in this example. If you could go on. Okay, thank you. Go on. Okay, and then the compensation payment, as I said, is just, if you could go back to the, yeah, thank you. So the compensation payment, as I said, is just the bid multiplied by the capacity. So this again is not dependent on this ranking mechanism. Okay, so thank you. Go on to the next slide. So this is also the last slide. This is just some of the results that we've had. On the left-hand side, there's just a map of all the power plants that have already been awarded compensation in the auctions. So we have completed 5 out of 7 tendering rounds for the target years 2020 to 2024. And currently we are in the process of evaluating the bids for the 6th tender round. So we have had quite an active level of participation, and 3 out of the 5 rounds were oversubscribed. I think this is also, of course, a little bit due to the fact that, as you know, electricity prices have really rocketed in the past few years, which was not anticipated when we started with the auctions. In the last round, we had to issue 1 administrative because the tender was undersubscribed. But all in all, we have identified around 10 gigawatts of capacity to be decommissioned. And if you sum up the historic emissions of these power plants, then we have achieved a reduction of 28 million tons of CO2 per year. And for this reduction, we have paid, as I said, around 700 million euros in compensation. Thank you very much for your attention. And and I have shared our contact details here on the slide as well. So if anyone has any follow-up questions after the event or wishes to get into contact with us, please feel free to use these contact details. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
We're getting a round of applause from the audience. I hope you can hear it. Thank you. I think, that was a very specific and concrete example, and we think hopefully it's useful also for other countries. For example, Indonesia, which is also looking at a coal phase out and is setting up different, looking at setting up an energy transition mechanism. So that's an example from Germany, and of course there are various approaches and how you can do it. And I do have quite a few follow-up questions, but before we dive into this deeper, I would like to see if we can complete the picture from our 4 countries and hear from South Africa, from Charlene.
Hi, Lisa. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. This is excellent. Okay. Good to have
Thank
you. I
you.
don't want to
Thank you
interrupt
so-
it, so you are invited to dive right into it.
Thank you so much for that. So, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share South Africa's experience on the carbon tax, which was implemented in 2019, and to speak a bit more around the Just Energy Transition Partnership that South Africa is exploring in terms of accessing finance for the just transition. Can you share the slides, please? Thank you. Thank you so much. You can go to the first slide. So the overall context for South Africa's approach in terms of the carbon tax and the commitments around the transition is essentially that we had started a process around the early 2000s to look at the role for environmental taxes to help achieve environmental goals and to internalize the environmental externalities. And based on that process, we explored the role for carbon pricing measures to help achieve our climate commitments, and that basically was the process around the carbon tax. We had also in the last 2 years undertaken significant technical work around our NDC commitments under the Paris Agreement, and these commitments were put forward at the end of last year. We recognize the developments around the Glasgow Pact last year, specifically around transitioning to low emissions energy systems, as well as the phasing down of unabated coal power, as well as the phase out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Importantly, we also support the need for a just transition, and as this transition is made, how do you what kind of support can be channeled to poor and low income households that would be impacted as, in the case of South Africa, some of the coal-fired power stations are shut down over time. So South Africa is ranked as one of the top 20 absolute emitters in the world. In our NDC commitments that we put forward last year, we committed for our emissions to peak in 2025 and then to decline in the period 2026 to 2030. This basically means that our emissions would be reduced in the range of 350 to 420 megatons. Current emissions are around 480 to 490 million tons. As part of the NDC that we put forward, there are various mitigation policy instruments as part of the package that have been put forward. This includes commitments to implement carbon budgets or caps at company level, as well as sector emission targets. And the carbon tax is a key part of that a package of policy measures to help create those incentives on the margin. What we do recognize is that as we make this transition to a low carbon economy, the emissions in the electricity and the liquid fuel sector will have to be reduced quite significantly over time. We can go to the next slide. The big emissions that we have. Our local context is very important to be taken into account as we transition, as we recover from the COVID pandemic, and our domestic concerns around our budget deficit. There's a need for us to really consider the longer term development plan for the country. We have in place an economic development and reconstruction program plan that basically prioritizes the need for energy security, sustainable resource use, and importantly, addressing issues around poverty and inequality. In order for us to make this transition that we need to make and to stimulate economic growth, there's a need for structural reforms and to remove barriers to the implementation of new electricity generation, making sure that we have water supply services and sanitation, as well as promoting the growth of green industries. A key part of this transition for South Africa economically as well is around the electricity sector, and we have specific reforms around introducing competition in the sector and separating the generation, transmission, and distribution part of our current electricity supply, and create the space for new renewable electricity to be brought on board by privately owned independent power producers. And this will create significant growth opportunities as we make this transition, and we're aiming to ensure that this improves the competitiveness of our economy. Next slide. So the domestic climate policy context, as I've mentioned, is around the Paris Agreement and the NDC commitments. We have been processing recently a national climate change bill, which includes our commitments to reduce emissions, but also outlines the additional policies around carbon budgets and sector targets. And we've also made commitments around low emissions development by 2050. These are aspirational commitments to net zero emissions. This has also been put forward by our big emitters, which is Eskom, our electricity generation, main electricity generator, as well as Sasol, our company responsible for liquid fuel generation. We have implemented the carbon tax as well since 2019. And the key policy as part of the suite of measures that we have is that we have in place an integrated resource plan that is the longer term plan around the infrastructure investments required to transition the sector. It includes the bringing in of new renewable electricity up to 2030, and there are ongoing discussions around this plan. There are various other initiatives that are also implemented around energy efficiency and specific targets that are being put in place, a strategy around green transport, and we have also implemented a carbon offset mechanism under the carbon tax, and we have set up a whole infrastructure around the administration of the carbon offset system. There are complementary tax incentives for energy efficiency that are already in place for renewable energy, and these form part of the suite of measures. We can move to the next slide. So this just presents a sketch of South Africa's greenhouse gas emissions based on the greenhouse gas inventory, which is completed by our Department of Environment. As you can see, this is for 2017, so it's not the latest update, but it's the latest publicly available update that we have. So because we are a coal-based economy, around 80% of our emissions are from fuel combustion related emissions, which with our electricity sector contributing for more than half of the total emissions. We also have a small set of emissions from the industrial processes sector of around 6.7%. The second biggest source of emissions for South Africa, besides electricity generation, is from the transport sector, which accounts for around 11% of our emissions. So for South Africa to transition, it has to and achieve its commitments made under the Paris Paris Agreement, there has to be significant reductions by almost 50 to 60% of the electricity sector-related emissions, which accounts for around 216 million tons currently. We can move to the next slide. I just wanted to share a bit around South Africa's experience in terms of implementation of the carbon tax. This was quite a long process. It started in around 2010 when we put out a discussion paper on the role for carbon taxes, and the policy was only implemented in June 2019. It was quite a significant consultation process of almost a decade. There were various engagements with stakeholders, industry stakeholders on the design of the tax. There were concessions made on the initial design to try and address concerns around the impacts of the tax on competitiveness of industries, as well as to address concerns around the impacts of the tax through high energy pricing on low income and poor households. So those form part of consultations on the carbon tax discussion paper, a policy paper that was put out, as well as 2 or 3 versions of the carbon tax bill, which form part of the consultations. We also had to concede in terms of the design of the tax and provide a range of tax exemptions or allowances to help sectors and to facilitate this transition that was required. We can go to the next slide. Slide. So this is just a summary of that consultation process. The approach on the carbon tax, which we took as South Africa, was that it forms part of a package of policy measures that we had implemented at the time. But importantly, the aim of the tax is to give effect to the polluter pays principle and ensure that these costs are incorporated into the final prices of carbon-intensive production processes and specific products, and by internalizing these externality costs to create those incentives for a behavior change in terms of future production, consumption, and investment decisions of companies. And as I said, it would form a key part of the policy measures aimed at achieving our greenhouse gas commitments that we set out. When we introduced this tax, we introduced the tax at a very low rate initially, a low effective rate with tax-free allowances ranging from 60 to 95% of total emissions of an entity, and to create those incentives on the margin. Next slide. So South Africa chose a carbon tax essentially because at the time we looked at the role for an emissions trading scheme, and because our process started around 2010, at the time we did not have a fixed target in terms of reducing emissions. So we considered a carbon tax and an emissions trading scheme as an instrument to help us to price emissions and bring down emissions. However, we opted for a carbon tax. The main reasons for this was because the carbon tax provides that price certainty over time to influence those investment decisions of companies. Secondly, the tax would piggyback on the existing tax administration system and infrastructure that we had already had in place, and there was more policy certainty in terms of the price level when it comes to a tax compared to an emissions trading system. Because we also we considered the structure at the time of the electricity sector, and taking into account that it's largely centralized with limited opportunity for trade to occur between various companies and few players, which would not generate reasonable carbon prices, we had then opted for the carbon tax. And our view is that this does provide a strong price signal on the margin to encourage businesses to change their behavior. Next slide. Slide. So how is the tax designed in order to address the concerns around the impacts on key sectors and their competitiveness, as well as the impact on households? So we've designed the tax in a way to provide a range of tax-free exemptions. So emissions above a certain level would be subject to the tax. At the stage, the tax exemptions range from 60 to 90% for combustion-related emissions and 60 to 95% for industrial process emissions. So emissions above that level, which is around 5 to 10% of total greenhouse gas emissions, would be taxed under the carbon tax. Who is covered under the tax? So the tax is very comprehensive. It covers around 80% of South Africa's emissions. It covers the electricity generation sector emissions, industrial processes, as well as fugitive emissions from activities such as mining. The current rate of the tax is around $8.50 per ton of carbon dioxide equivalents. So it also covers carbon dioxide emissions, but it also includes methane as well as nitrous oxide emissions. So it covers most greenhouse gas emissions in the design of the tax. As part of the engagements with stakeholders on the tax, there were concerns or requests around recycling and earmarking some of the revenues to support industry's transition. So the design of the tax includes a certain revenue recycling measures as part of a phased approach to introducing the tax. Next slide. We can move to the next slide. So the current tax design, as I've spoken through, is outlined in this slide. On your left-hand side, you'll see the various tax exemptions that are currently applicable. So around there's a basic tax-free allowance of 60% that's applicable to all activities covered under the carbon tax. We provide an allowance for trade exposure. So those sectors that have a trade intensity greater than 30% basically qualify for a trade exposure allowance of 10%. We also have a 10% tax-free allowance for industrial process and fugitive emissions, where these are hard to abate emissions, and we have an allowance of 5% where a company performs better than a sector benchmark and actually reduces its emissions. To provide sectors with flexibility around reducing their emissions, we have in place the carbon offset allowance ranging from 5 to 10%. As part of the revenue recycling measures and dealing with existing taxes that are in place, we provide a tax incentive for energy efficiency. So this tax incentive was extended in our budget this year to end in 2025 as part of the extension of the first phase of the tax. Secondly, we have in place an electricity generation levy, which covers fossil-based electricity generation, and taxpayers are allowed to offset the payment of this levy against their carbon tax liability. So this will ensure that there's a limited impact in the short term on the price of electricity. And the third area is that we have in place a renewable energy independent power producers program, which was implemented around 2012. We've had 4 bidding windows under this program, and there's a 5th and 6th bidding window, and that would be has been undertaken and would be undertaken soon. So purchases of electricity, renewable electricity under this program can be offset against the carbon tax liability of the big emitters. And this is primarily the state-owned entity Eskom, as well as our coal to liquids company. So these are the 3 main measures for in terms of the revenue recycling measures that we have under the tax. In our budget this year, To provide the policy certainty going forward and to influence investment decisions of companies, we announced that the carbon tax rate will increase to $20 in 2026 and increase further to $30 in 2030. The approach that we've taken is that the transition period has been extended to 2025. It was supposed to come to an end at the end of this year, but from 2026 onwards, there will be a higher penalty for emissions. So there's a strong incentive for companies to take action earlier to reduce their emissions. And lastly, in terms of South Africa's transition and the shift from coal to cleaner electricity, our IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan for Electricity, has built in a reduction of our of coal in our energy mix to around 43% in 2030, and an increase in renewable energy to around 33% in 2030. The current energy mix accounts for 74% of coal and 7% of renewable electricity. So there's a strong commitment for the period up to 2030 to make this shift to renewable-based electricity. There has been a commitment of around $8.5 billion that has been made by developed countries in terms of climate finance to help South Africa make this shift that needs to be made. We expect that there will be around 100,000 coal sector workers that would be impacted by this transition that we need to make, and some of the funding that would be obtained through climate finance will help facilitate the transition for that sector, as well as promote the creation of new industries in the different provinces and the towns that would be impacted by the phase out of coal. So the carbon tax form parts of that suite of policy measures. It is in addition to efforts around the just energy transition and accessing finance in order to make the transition. So thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you so much for presenting and also for your patience with our technical issues. Great to have you. I hope we can have both Charlene and Anne now on the screen to continue our discussion as part of the panel. I would like to follow both of you directly with a follow-up question on what you presented. So if we could get you on the screen, both of you. And I would stay with you, Charlene. So if you look worldwide, by June 2022, there were 71 carbon pricing mechanisms in development or already implemented worldwide in countries. And about half of them were carbon taxes and the other half were ETS, emission trading schemes. We just learned about South Africa's experience in setting up the carbon tax. It really struck me how long it took to embark on a discussion and then get it implemented. And we know that other countries are working on it. For example, Indonesia has announced that has introduced a carbon tax and is also working on an energy emission trading scheme. So I would be curious from your perspective, from the experience from South Africa, is there something you could share with other countries such as Indonesia in how to set up this carbon tax? Are there certain lessons learned you could share with us?
Thank you, Lisa, for that question. Yes, it was a long process of almost 10 years, and it was very difficult. I think that the big challenge in the process is managing basically achieving some balance between a representation of stakeholders in the consultation process. In our experience, we found the consultations were dominated by industry stakeholders as would be expected, because they would be most impacted by the tax, but there was limited representation from other stakeholder groups as well. So the one piece of advice I would give is to ensure that the consultation process and the representation of stakeholders are balanced, with representation from industry stakeholders, but also civil society, academia, and I think if possible to also include international institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF and other institutions in those discussions as well. I think we benefited quite considerably as South Africa in terms of being part of a project with the World Bank around the Partnership for Market Readiness project, as well as the State and Trends report that the World Bank publishes on an annual basis. And this ensured that, we were always kept abreast of the various developments globally. I think the second issue for me is that initially, the discussions on the carbon tax were led at officials level and academic level in government. But as the process went on, there was a need to ensure that the discussions were escalated to a higher level and included, various ministers that are responsible for the climate transition, that the parliament was also aware of the various issues around climate change, the risks that it presents to the country, as well as the role for carbon pricing. And in addition to that, CEOs as well of companies, at a company level, discussions of safety, health, and environment are dealt with separately, and at this does not reach the executive level in terms of discussions and influence the investments that need to be made. So secondly, for me, it's that the discussions on climate change and on carbon pricing needs to be escalated to a higher level right at the beginning to ensure that there are proper knowledge and technical discussions that these various individuals are aware of and are able to be champions of the policy. And then lastly, the carbon tax or carbon pricing forms part of a package of policy measures. On its own, it would not be as successful in terms of influencing the behavior change, and it would have to be at a very high level compared to the levels that are applied currently under carbon taxes and emissions trading systems. So it would be important as part of the consultations and the narrative around a carbon tax or a carbon price to locate this as part of a package of measures that government would be implementing. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think that was very, very clear and helpful. Anne, over to you for one question. So you talked about the option and mechanism for hard coal, and you also showed at the beginning of your slide that there's hard coal and also lignite, and there's two operators for lignite. I'm wondering if you could also elaborate a bit more on how during the coal phase-out process the phase-out of lignite fired coal power plants is being undertaken. You mentioned a carrot and stick approach for hard coal. Is the same applied for lignite operators?
As I said, the approaches are quite different for lignite and hard coal. So for lignite, as I mentioned, the government basically negotiated a deal with these two operators. And so for these power plants, the decommissioning dates are just part of the coal phase-out law. And the compensation payments as well are fixed, and they are also part of the law. So it is really relatively simple from an implementation perspective. You just wait for the power plant operator to shut down the plant, and then they will receive each year a part of the fixed compensation.
And in this regard, was there also then a discussion on potential risk of compensation, and how was this being solved?
So, of course, on the one hand, you have to remember that the lignite power plants also have to take part in the EU emissions trading system. So, of course, this also reduces their profitability. And on the other hand, and this is still ongoing, the whole lignite compensation payment is subject to EU state aid rules. So they are still currently being evaluated by the European Commission in conjunction with our ministry. And the goal is to make sure that these payments are adequate. And of course, this review will also take into account the changed prices since the implementation of the law. So of course, at the moment, the business case for coal is a bit better than expected. So I think that this will probably also be taken into account in this review by the European Commission. But of course, if you the approach is very different, and of course it's if you negotiate something, then it may be the case that the result is not as competitive as with the auction mechanism. But I think that this was the government decided on this approach very. They knew what they were doing, and I think you have to remember the lignite industry is also responsible for a lot of jobs in Germany. So it was not just a question of compensating the closure of the mine, the power plants, but also compensating the closure of these mines. And you have to recultivate them as well. So the money is also going into this recultivation process.
Okay, thank you for enlightening us. Okay, I would like to open the second segment of our discussion very briefly before we then also open the questions to the floor. We will extend the session until 5:20 for your information, so we still have a little bit of time. And in the second segment, I would like to look a bit more on the current situation, the global crisis, the energy crisis we're facing, and the impact on energy security and also just transition, and then wrap up at the end with the role of the G20 and how international cooperation can help to overcome. So, I mean, as we know, we just come more than 2 years of the pandemic, and since the beginning of this year, there's a war in Europe between Ukraine and war, and this has the implications that a lot of countries now revisit their dependency on energy imports. There are sanctions that impact global supply chains and that somehow affect all countries worldwide. So I would like to hear from our speakers their country perspective. So Seung Chang, starting with you from South Korea, could you tell us a little bit more how this global energy crisis has impacted the discussion in South Korea, and has it also impacted the strategies and targets to decarbonization? Or maybe you can elaborate a bit. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for your questions. And then actually it's very difficult one to announce or to answer the right way. Energy crisis and then COVID-19 hinder our advancement of renewable and other low carbon transition. But actually Korea, as you might expect in over the world, and consumer price is highly increased, and then enterprises and companies do not want to invest more money on that area, and then production cost will be increased accordingly. So we have a very difficult situation undergone, but Korean government tried to expand the the more money to the green energy transition, as I told you in an earlier presentation, into the direction of the company. So, but the important thing is, I think, we do not expect the future step, and I think that each program, the individuals try to find themselves, and then with the full awareness of how important it is those transitions required on the scale adapted to their action. So I think the practical implementation is required, not fully discussing on the direction or the scale of money or another itself. So it's high time to implement the small programs nearby within us. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sung-Cheng. So it's rather a reinforcement of the strategy and the importance to implement it to move ahead on energy security. And basically the same question to you. I mean, Germany is also quite at the center of this crisis. The impact is quite significant to the German market. So the prices for electricity, gas prices are going through the roof, and this will also continue in the future. And Germany is revisiting its supplies. So I'm curious also from your perspective, you could share a little bit on the discussion, what is happening in Germany, and if you foresee if this has an impact on Germany's targets that we just talked about, and in particular also the coal phase out. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, of course. I think from our perspective, as BNetzA, this is mostly, hopefully, a short-term security of supply issue for Germany. So mostly, of course, gas security of supply, but of course that very easily becomes an electricity security of supply problem. So that is why the government has decided to they have tried to implement a short to mid-term solution where some of the coal-fired power plants that have already won the compensation, but that have not been decommissioned yet, they will be allowed to stay in the market a little bit longer. This refers to these plants that were supposed to leave the market this year and next year. These are in fact forbidden to close down. Instead of being forced to close down, they are temporarily forced to stay open. And as long as we are in the alert or emergency level of the gas security of supply regulation, these power plants are actually also allowed to produce electricity for the market. So this will hopefully help to reduce the burning of gas for electricity generation during this winter and the next winter. But the idea is still that the long-term coal phase-out targets will remain the same. So this whole solution will end in the spring of 2024, we hope. And we are still continuing on with our long-term coal phase-out targets. Yeah, but I hope also that we can, of course, when we look at the price situation, this is, of course, a very big problem for especially for a lot of low-income households. But I hope that we may also see it a little bit as an opportunity, because I think it can also give a very strong incentive for energy efficiency, both in the private sector as well as for production processes, and also I think for the hydrogen industry in Germany. This will give it, hopefully give it a very large boost.
Thank you very much, and also yeah, to say the positive aspects, so that a crisis can also be an opportunity for energy efficiency. And I think also Germany has also shown that it really sticks to its renewable energy upscaling targets and the importance, the relevance of renewable energy for maintaining energy security and independence. So thank you for sharing this insight. With that, I would like to bring also our two gentlemen again back into the discussion. Payadi, let's start with Charlene. Sorry, one more question before Charlene. Before I would like to give you the word to wrap it up again a little bit also for the G20 perspective. Charlene, you talked about, I mean, what you've heard now is the energy crisis leading to increased costs also for customers. We talked about, you mentioned the just transition and the importance of this also for South Africa. Yeah, we also have then to look at the risk of increased energy poverty through the developments right now. I would like to see from your perspective how you would see if a carbon tax could potentially also boost a just transition in South Africa. What could be just implications coming out of this from your perspective?
Thanks, Lisa. Maybe just to start with that, the whole current energy crisis, and in South Africa, we do have an electricity crisis currently in terms of the challenges our state-owned entity faces on supplying coal-based electricity. So our president made announcements in the last 2 weeks to basically expedite the introduction and implementation of renewable energy projects to help with local electricity security of supply. So we've made some important commitments as part of that process to bring on board decentralized electricity generation and to open up the market to independent power producers, but as well as to local industries and households to install solar panels and solar PV and to feed electricity back into the grid to help enhance and ensure the secure supply of electricity. So the crisis has actually helped in terms of expediting that process. We currently, we had a cap on the amount of renewable-based electricity that could be done independently without requiring a license, and that was 1 megawatts. This was increased to 100 megawatt. And there's also initiatives underway around reviewing the integrated resource plan to remove the cap within the plan on decentralized electricity generation. There. So this is quite significant commitments from the government around transitioning the electricity sector. The just energy transition plan would actually help to facilitate this transition, and it would all contribute quite significantly towards the phase out of around, I think it's 6 gigawatts of coal-based electricity, as these power stations are quite old, more than 40 years old. So the decommissioning of those power stations and repowering them to produce electricity from solar PV, wind, as well as to do battery storage. So that's the big initiative in South Africa currently in terms of the transition. The carbon tax is an important lever on the margin. To serve as a penalty to the extent that these commitments around the integrated resource plan are not implemented. So it plays a key role on the margin to provide that signal to companies that if you do not make the transition that's required, your emissions from 2026 would be taxed at a higher level. So it's a key lever. It could also facilitate a just transition, and there are ongoing discussions around use of revenue and channeling some of the funding around supporting communities in coal-based and dominated provinces within the country. But these are ongoing discussions that will form part of the consultations around the carbon tax going forward. Thanks.
Thank you for so much. I think it's quite interesting to see how much of a role just transition as a concept already plays in South Africa and how it's being integrated. Yeah, with that, I would give the last question before we open to the panel to Payadi. And maybe reflect a little bit also on what you've heard. I would be curious to hear from your perspective how you see that the impact is from this energy crisis on Indonesia, if there is an impact on the strategies for the power sector, and then also maybe wrap it up a little bit with what's the role of the G20 here, the international cooperation, and thank you.
Yes. I think based on my perspective, I can give the illustration like this. We get pressure from the oil and gas from the other side because of the crisis, because of the war of Ukraine every day to every country in the world. And the other side also we have a pressure also from the coal because of the our spirit to reduce our low carbon emission. If we get the pressure from the other side, from gas, oil, and the other side also from the coal, what happened here? I think the consequence, it is impact directly to the economic. For the time being, I think. Several years will impact to the economic. But in the future, it is make us to go to the renewable energy. It is independency of the utilization of renewable energy from, and I mean to support, to provide the energy from the renewable energy. Should you do that? The independency of the country using the renewable energy should be boosted. This is the point, the solution for that in the future, in the long term, for every country. But of course, in the long term, it depends on the country itself in dependency of the renewable energy potency itself. Such as maybe in several countries, such as in Germany, may be different with our country, because our potential of renewable energy in our country is quite huge. But in the German or the Japan, it may be different. But the consequence, this is beside the condition of the crisis and make pressure to other countries regarding the providing the energy. But the other side, we have the good advantage in the future to promote the renewable energy. For the time being, yes, we would like to promote some kind of transformation, our utilization of the energy usage, such as using the electricity stove. Before nowadays we mostly using the liquid petroleum gas, and then we will transfer to using the electricity stove. But we have to push from the power plant itself using transformation using the renewable energy. Stop to using the coal power plant, and then the electricity will be supplied from the renewable energy to using the household for the stove itself. And then the other side using the promoting the electricity vehicle. Yeah, I think it is the one of the solution, make everybody more efficient to use the electrification. Also make everybody have to transform the condition have to let's say to leave the utilization, to reduce the utilization of fossil fuel, using the oil, using the gas, and using the coal in our country. This is the solution, I think. For the time being, yes, the economic will be impact to our country, but I think in the future will have to be transfer our transition energy to be more independent with the other countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this. I would like to then look into the audience. So we have, of course, the audience in the room, and we also have audience online. If there are any questions, I would like to already point out someone. One speaker on the very left, Pa Yusuf, if you would like to also pick up maybe the last question. So Pa Yusuf is he's basically from BAPEN as our main counterpart for the case project, and I'm also curious to hear from your perspective, especially from the planning perspective. We would like to add some remarks.
Check. Yeah, thank you, Pulisa. Yeah, I think based on our discussion today, we have some several insights, I think. So first of all, with regard to CASE program, Ibu, clean, affordable, and secure energy, I think the first objective that we want to achieve is to change the narrative based on the evidence. So I think today we see some evidence from South Korea, from South Africa, as well as from Germany, that we need to have some kind of strong policies in place in order for us to make some gradual improvements towards energy transition successfully. And it seems that the public consultation or public involvement also important in this case, because with that then we gonna have a strong involvement from the citizens, the all relevant stakeholders as well. And also I think we need to emphasize the institutional setting as well. And finally is the commitment of the what we call relevant stakeholders. And with that, I think in terms of national development planning, in here we talk about Indonesia. Actually, we already has several approach, development planning approach. At least we have 3 or 4 components. First is we have a political approach, and then second we need to have a strong top-down and bottom-up involvement, as well as how can we what we call again stakeholders participation. And with that, Indonesia already in the beginning of the discussion, we have some planning documents actually. So we have longer term document, medium term document, until annual document. And so with that, the coordination or the integration among stakeholders, I think it is necessary to be put in the national development planning documents. So I think this is my first what I call it comments here. And the second comments actually with regard your last question, Ibu Lisa, with regard to G20 perspectives. I think based on the discussion, we understand the importance of the integrated approach. And in the early discussion, Ibu Sriwanti already mentioned about transforming policy into actions. I think this is very important. And in terms of government cooperation under G20, I think importance of international cooperation, particularly first on technology, like South Korea mentioning, or almost all countries, yeah, South Korea, South Africa, as well as Germany mentioning about the green hydrogen. So I think the collaboration, the cooperation to develop particular technology also important, because climate change, this issue is faced by all government, all countries. So then the cooperation in terms of technology is very important. And finally, of course, how can we providing appropriate funding and financing. So Ibu Lisa, I think this is maybe very rough idea about the integration or convergence, the planning to ensure that policies that already set can be implemented and transformed into actions. Thank you, Ibu Lisa.
Thank you so much for adding your thoughts and summarizing it a bit. It was very helpful. I think the gentleman behind you, I saw, was raising his hand, so maybe we take 2 questions from the floor, and then we also see if Mia, who is scanning what is happening online, has anything to add, a question. Do we have a microphone for the gentleman here? If you could introduce yourself.
Okay, hello, my name is Takesh from Shurako Sustainability and Resilience. I have a question to Pa Rahmat or Pa Yusuf. I saw the scenario for the net zero or not zero. This has quite a lot of gap from the business as usual. So, I mean, this shows that it's quite difficult to take this. So, do you have other scenarios somewhere between net zero and business as usual? I mean, I found a similar scenario, which is 1.5 and 2.0 global warming scenario. Is it, I mean, somewhere in between? I'd like to know if you have other scenario. Also, could you please explain a little bit more about the net zero? Is it net zero within a country or within a sector? Thank you.
Yeah, Payus. Who would like to take the question?
Okay, what I already explained in the slide mentioned that we have several final scenarios. First, actually, the first one is we call a net zero scenario. Net zero scenario, the scenario is for the electricity sector. Hopefully the emission in 2016 is zero emission. It's electricity system. Yeah, for electricity power plant is zero emission. But totally totally for energy sector, yeah. But totally for the energy sector is almost 401 million tons. Totally for the energy sector. For the power sector is zero emission. But if we call it zero emission, it means that for the power sector, the emission is zero in 2016. But emission totally for the sector energy is 129 million ton. This is the difference between net zero emission and zero emission. The zero emission, it means zero emission for electricity. This is what I mean. Already answered your my question? Yeah, not in the energy sector. Energy sector still in the emission in 400 and 129, but for the electricity, 0 and 0.
Thank you so much. There's another gentleman. Do we have a microphone? Yeah, it's coming. Please introduce yourself.
Hello. Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for arranging this. My name is Zalbara Al-Iskandarani. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for International Relations of Saudi Arabia. A quick comment and a question. The comment is that I would like to salute you and also especially South Africa for including the greenhouse gases concept, because we see that many times the focus is really on the carbon and the low carbon, but really the issue is much broader than just carbon. There are many other gases that harm the environment, so we always have to be cognizant in capturing that. My question is, since we're talking about development, and especially developing countries and least developed countries, now with the drive of advanced economies steering away from conventional sources of energy and going more for renewable and whatnot, that is expected to basically maybe lower the supply of the conventional sources of energy, which in turn could impact negatively the developing countries. So I'm just curious to know that if any of your experiences, that angle was taken into account, meaning that we're not only looking at it from a national perspective, which is a good cause, but the potential impact if all the countries start abandoning the conventional sources, and then the conventional sources become so expensive for developing countries to tap into. So this dynamic, I think, is very interesting and very important to take a look at. I'd be curious to know if any of the guests here have had a similar experience or a study or a review on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any of the speakers would like to take this question? Was a remark / question. South Africa was mentioned. I don't know, Charlene, if you want to come in.
Thanks.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Lisa. Sure. This is a difficult question, and especially as developing countries and South Africa, where our electricity is dependent on coal at this point. I think the benefit of the transition has been that at this point it's become more cost effective to produce electricity from renewable energy than coal, taking into account the various externalities. So I think the question is very valid, but it also has to take into account the current global developments and especially the developments around solar PV and wind. South Africa finds itself in this situation where it's looking at, in the context of its energy plan, electricity plan, the investments for the next 20 to 30 years. And at this point, basically renewable energy crowds out coal economically there. I think maybe to also add is that the design of our policies domestically in South Africa, including the carbon tax, is that we started off at a very low rate initially. And the tax at this point, the effective tax rate is under $3 per ton. And I think if you're looking globally, we have a carbon pricing rates of probably under $5 per ton there. So globally, the carbon prices are nowhere near the levels that they should be to fully internalize the externality costs of climate change. So I think that countries are careful in terms of how they introduce carbon pricing. What's important is introducing the tax or a trading system in a way that it helps facilitate the transition and it penalizes additional emissions as you move forward. And this has been the key considerations around the design of South Africa's carbon tax. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlene. I'm looking at Mia, who has the tablet with all the questions from the audience. We don't have much time, but maybe you could read out, maybe give a feedback on what the discussion was on the online forum, and maybe read out 1-2 questions, which we then can answer in 1-2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for all the speakers. We have a very lively discussion on the online platform. We have around 15 to 20 questions, but we are very sorry that we have to cut it short due to the limitation of the time. So the first question is from Anya to Pak Yadi. What plans will be implemented at IKN, or the new capital of Indonesia, related to the application of green or renewable energy? In your opinion, could the IKN could and should use 100% of green or renewable energy for the electricity demand in the city, and also supply to the surrounding areas? The second question is to Ms. Charlene from Daniel. You mentioned that in the first phase of South Africa's carbon tax, the tax rate is very low, or rather lower. How do you measure if a carbon tax is too low or too high? But I think this was mentioned briefly in your previous answer. And in your opinion, how to align carbon tax, other carbon pricing mechanisms, or other available climate finance instruments like sustainable finance loan or grant to support the decarbonization process? Thank you.
Thank you, Mia, and thank you everyone for all the many questions. It's a shame we don't have so much time, but maybe Yadi, if you could take this question in, I don't know, maximum 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, regarding the IKN, hopefully everybody know the IKN. Yeah. This is the new capital of Indonesia, the new capital of Nusantara in North Kalimantan. We moved the new capital from Jakarta to already moved the capital Jakarta to Kalimantan. Hopefully, this program, this vision to move our return will be can be achieved on time, yeah, and achieve on place at the time. Regarding the renewable energy for the IKN, so we basically consider the renewable energy resources itself in IKN itself. It means that if we see the potential energy, renewable energy potential in IKN, there is very limited. That's why the energy supply for the IKN, especially for the electricity, will be supplied from outside from IKN, from the Kalimantan system. Nowadays, almost maybe 70% until 80% system of Kalimantan, electricity Kalimantan still depending of the coal. That's important time being when we inject the electricity system to the IKN, but at the time being we rely to the IKN system, to the Kalimantan system, still using the coal power plant, automatically depend of the coal power plant from Kalimantan system. But in the future, there are several programs to develop the renewable energy in IKN, but again and again, the renewable energy development in IKN, it doesn't mean the renewable energy only for IKN, from IKN to IKN. I mean, we have to look more widen than just IKN, but we have to look as a Kalimantan system, because the transformation of energy providing in Kalimantan and IKN, not only IKN, but we have to look wider than that, energy IKN from the Kalimantan to transform. That's why the system of Kalimantan energy of Kalimantan, especially the power sector in Kalimantan, step by step gradually have to be transformed in using the renewable energy. So many potential in Kalimantan, such as hydro and anything such as solar system and others. Step by step, we would like to transform the system Kalimantan to IKN, include using the new technology of renewable energy using hydrogen and others, solar system or others, also internally in IKN itself. Yes.
Thank you, Charlene.
But one thing, the additional, hopefully in the future, the electricity will be the future of energy of IKN. This is my point.
Thank you for this strong commitment for renewable energy for Kalimantan. Charlene, do you want to take the second question? If you could limit it to 2 minutes, then we have to wrap it up.
Thanks, Lisa. I think I'll be quicker. As I mentioned, we started the process on the carbon tax at a time when nobody likes taxes. It's like death. It's bad news. And at the time we started with this tax, we had proposed an effective carbon tax rate of around $10 per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. And this took into account a review of literature at the time, both local and international literature, on the appropriate price of carbon. But while we, as we went through the consultation process and the negotiations with various stakeholder groups, we ended up with an effective tax rate of under $3. So the approach was then to say, introduce this tax in a phased manner, and provide that indication at a certain point that there will be a higher, more significant penalty for additional emissions. We've seen some of the work from the World Bank, from the IMF around minimum carbon pricing, the proposals and implementation of the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism. And it's in the interest and national interest of South Africa to ensure that on the margin we price these emissions. The rates we proposed in 2026 and 2030 of $20 and $30 per ton of CO2 equivalent is intended to provide that strong price signal on the margin. And as I said, this would play an important role as part of the package of measures to help facilitate a just energy transition for South Africa. There isn't a direct link at this stage with climate finance, but the commitments under the NDC up to 2030, this commitment around the higher carbon tax rate should be taken into account globally in terms of South Africa accessing climate finance to enable the just transition. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Yeah, with that we come to the end of our very long discussion today. I think we touched upon many topics. I mean, energy transition and decarbonization is a very wide field, and we started with topics that we could dive much deeper. I think it shows the complexity of the challenge we're looking at, and also the uncertainty, right? We don't know the answers. We don't know many answers, but we have a lot of questions, but we also have solutions, and which some of them we looked at today. It is clear that countries are different. Countries have different starting points within the G20, but also, of course, outside of the G20. And the solutions will be different, but I think today we learned quite a bit new insights. I think on the one side we heard from the carbon tax, and I think it was really, Charlene, you really pointed out the importance of a participative approach to identify champions. We heard about just integration, that it can be an integrated approach of the planning within the carbon tax, but also the larger energy transition strategies. We heard the example from Germany on the auctioning scheme, which can work, which was led to strong participation by coal companies, and we learned about the importance of setting incentives and right frameworks to build up a renewable energy industry. I think overall, what we've seen from talking about the energy crisis, I think Anne said it quite nicely, that the crisis can be an opportunity. So we see it in Germany, the discussion is really more about, okay, we need to save energy efficiency is important, and sometimes you wonder, okay, why wasn't this discussed so much before? So it triggers a lot of these things, and that's positive, right? And we also heard from all the countries there is a clear commitment to the targets. It doesn't get easier through the energy crisis, but there's a strong commitment that renewable energy is the future, and that, the industry shall be built up. I think overall I want to conclude with again, the recognition that cooperation and exchange is important. So we have exchange platforms like this event, of course the G20 as a platform to learn from each other, to learn from other successes, but also from mistakes, and that we depend on each other. So we are not alone in this. Countries cannot plan their energy transition by themselves. We rely on each other. Our national activities have an impact on other countries and regions. So we are in all of this together. But I think that's good news, so we don't have to tackle these big challenges by ourselves. And with that, I would like to conclude, and please join me with a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you so much for staying a little bit longer today. And again, for the host, Slivan. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Ms. Lisa Tinchert for leading the panel session. And also thank you to our special speakers, Mr. Yadi J. Ardajat, Ms. Charlene Hemraj, Mr. Sung Chan Chang, Dr. Tarinya Supasa, Ms. Anne Baguette, and also thank you to Mrs. Raden Siliwanti. With that, we now come to the end of this event. I hope it was very informative and very valuable for you. The G20 Development Working Group side event talking about national development policy making on decarbonization to achieve clean and affordable electricity. An event organized by the Clean, Affordable and Secure Energy for Southeast Asia, or CASE, a bilateral partnership project by the Ministry of Bappenas of the Republic of Indonesia, and the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action of Germany. In Indonesia, it's implemented by GIZ Indonesia and Institute for Essential Services Reform. Give another big round of applause to this event. And ladies and gentlemen, before I close today's event, I would like to announce several information. You can download all the materials for today's event by simply scanning the QR code on screen or by kindly browsing into case4sea.org. To all journalists, friends who wish to conduct interviews right after the session, please kindly contact Mr. Ganda as one of our committee members. And ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow we will also conduct a workshop and dialogue called Sustainable Economic Recovery by Promoting Solar PV Development, talking about maximizing economic benefit and utilizing transformational finance mechanism to support rooftop solar PV development in Bali, which starts at 9 a.m. tomorrow for the morning session until 3:30 p.m. at Legion Room of BNDCC. There will be 2 sessions of dialogue, and this event is open to public, so you are cordially invited to attend. On behalf of the host of the organizing committee, I extend my appreciation for all of you for your tremendous support, and thank you for your active participation during this lengthy meeting. I'm Edmund Daniel. Wish you a great and productive afternoon. See you next time, and take care.
But thank you so much.